The directors of the Caldervale Railway had chosen the public booking hall for Nora Whitlock's disgrace because every sound carried beneath its iron and glass roof. Porters stopped beside their barrows, clerks leaned from the ticket windows. Even the passengers stranded by the November rain turned to watch Edwin Harcourt lay 6 copied telegrams upon a table, as if he were dealing cards. Nora stood alone before him in her plain navy dress, her hands reddened by years of cleaning brass contacts and tightening binding screws. At 28, she had spent 11 years learning that a telegraph office rewarded precision but seldom forgave a woman for possessing it. "These messages were sold to the North Pennine Company before our directors could act upon them," Harcourt announced. His silver waistcoat and measured sorrow made accusation sound like public duty. "Each passed through Miss Whitlock's instrument." Nora looked at the copied forms. Coal tariffs, carriage contracts, and notices of 2 proposed land purchases had been written in the railway's code. Her initials appeared beneath every message, but the time marks were wrong. 3 bore the neat 7 of the new office clock. On the dates shown, that clock had still been in Leeds for repair. She said so. Harcourt did not glance at the clockmaker's receipt she placed before him. The company's solicitor, Mr. Pelham, offered her a prepared confession. If she signed, the railway would not seek imprisonment. It would keep her accumulated savings as compensation and transfer to her the abandoned Dunmere Signal Tower, a roof-broken stone building beside a branch line lifted 12 years earlier. The tower carried £9 in unpaid parish rates and no legal connection to a working track. Harcourt called the arrangement merciful. Nora's father had once told her that a false signal became no truer because an important man raised it. Elias Whitlock had taught her the Morse alphabet on a kitchen table, using a spoon against a cracked saucer after the railway dismissed him. He had died 6 years later, with the Dunmere collision still attached to his name. Signalman drunk on duty, 21 injured, 1 guard killed. Nora had entered railway service partly to support them, and partly to learn enough to clear him. She had found nothing. Now Harcourt expected his daughter's signature beneath another convenient lie. She pushed the confession back. "I will take the deed because wages earned are not charity. I will not take your guilt." Mr. Pelham flinched. Harcourt merely smiled. By 4 o'clock, Nora had been escorted from the office with her father's brass line tester, a spare dress, 2 blankets, and 6 shillings. Her rooming housekeeper, frightened by the word prosecution, set her wooden trunk in the passage. Before dusk, Nora bought bread, lamp oil, nails, and a tarred sheet, then walked 7 miles north along the old branch embankment. The rails were gone, leaving paired scars through wet grass. At the crest beyond Alderwick village, Dunmere Tower rose against the clouded sky, square and black-windowed, with half its slate roof folded inward. The door hung from one hinge. Rain had soaked the operating floor, pigeons nested above the stair, and nettles filled the former trackbed. Yet the north wall remained sound, the cast-iron stove could be patched, and an old instrument table stood beneath the broken windows. Nora spent her first night under the tarred sheet with her boots on and her father's tester beneath her coat. She listened to rain strike stone, and calculated that 6 shillings would not feed her until the parish demanded its £9. She inventoried the ruin before darkness made numbers unreliable. 2 chairs had been broken for kindling. The lead from the window sash weights was gone, as were the brass handles from the signal levers, but a stone cistern behind the tower still caught clean rainwater. Under the stair she found a shovel, 3 sound fire bricks, and a coil of rusted fencing wire. She assigned each thing a use in her notebook. The habit came from Elias, who had insisted that poverty was not disorder unless one surrendered to it. Nora set aside 1 heel of bread for morning, stuffed moss around the least damaged window frame, and wedged the door with a sleeper chair. The distant main line sounded twice during the night, a whistle followed by the low, turning thunder of freight. Each time, the tower seemed to remember what it had been built to hear. Near midnight, 3 measured taps sounded below the floorboards. She held her breath. The taps came again. Short, pause, long, short, long. The old request to receive used on private railway circuits before standardized call signs. Nora lifted the lamp. Beneath the instrument table stood a telegraph key green with corrosion, its visible wires cut flush at the wall. When she touched the tester to the terminals, the needle trembled. A current, weak but unmistakable, moved through a circuit that did not legally exist. Nora cleaned the contact with a strip torn from her cuff. She pressed the key once. The reply came slowly, as if carried through miles of damp earth. Whitlock. Then, Roki. Then a date, 14 March 1865, the night of the Dunmere collision, and the figures 4, 11, 2. The current failed before she could answer. At dawn, she searched the tower. The cut wires behind the table were decoys. A second pair descended through a porcelain tube hidden inside the table leg. Fresh scoring marked the brass relay, and the cupboard that had once held wet cell batteries was warmer than the stone around it. Someone had used the circuit recently. Nora followed the tube to the ground floor, where it disappeared beneath a flagstone too heavy to lift. She marked its edges with chalk and went to Alderwick for a crowbar, food, and information. The village lay around a steep market cross, its roofs shining with rain. At the public pump, two women stopped speaking when Nora approached. A notice from Caldervale had reached Alderwick ahead of her, warning tradesmen that property associated with an alleged breach of confidence might become subject to seizure. It was carefully phrased to avoid calling her guilty, while ensuring everyone behaved as if she were. Nora copied the notice word for word. Beside Harcourt's printed signature, she saw a typesetter's flaw. The lower loop of every capital H was broken. She had seen the same flaw on the anonymous memorandum used to begin the inquiry against her. She could not yet prove where that memorandum had been printed, but she recorded the resemblance. Evidence, her father said, was memory made fit to survive fear. She also noted the posting date. It preceded her dismissal by a day, showing that someone had prepared Alderwick to reject her before the directors pretended to hear her defense. The paper offered no verdict, but its timing revealed the verdict had already existed. The ironmonger refused her credit after hearing her name. The baker sold her yesterday's loaf, but crossed himself when she mentioned the tower. Only Jacob Sen, a one-armed former platelayer who repaired kettles behind the smithy, listened without interrupting. He had lost his left arm in the Dunmere collision. He remembered Elias Whitlock running down the embankment with a red lamp before the wagon struck. A drunken man does not run straight on ballast in sleet, Jacob said, but Mr. Harcourt's inquiry knew what answer it wanted. The name Rook belonged to Thomas Rook, the railway's first electrical engineer. He had resigned after the collision and died, officially, of a fever 12 years ago. Jacob remembered Rook and Elias testing something at Dunmere, two bells that would not permit opposing signals to clear at once. After the inquiry, company men stripped the branch line and sealed the tower. Jacob agreed to lend Nora a crowbar if she repaired his failing galvanometer. She did more. Using a thread of copper from her spare coil and the spring from a broken penknife, she restored its movement within an hour. Jacob's reserve softened into respect. Together they raised the flagstone. Beneath it lay not treasure but a narrow cable trench lined with glazed brick. One wire ran south toward the active Caldervale main line. Another ran north beneath the removed branch. Both were insulated in gutta percha and protected by pitch, expensive work no ordinary signal tower required. Nora tested resistance in each direction. The northern line ended nearby. The southern one continued beyond the range of her pocket instrument. Jacob showed her how the old formation had been altered after the accident. The ballast north of the tower contained pale quarry stone, but a 20-yard patch beside the ditch had been refilled with dark furnace clinker. Company laborers had not merely lifted the rails, they had excavated something and disguised the cut. Nora measured the disturbed ground and compared it with the angle of the cable trench. The northern wire did not follow the former track. It curved toward a low brick mound among the alders. They did not dig at once. The river had saturated the bank, and a careless trench could collapse or expose the gutta percha to frost. Nora drove 3 numbered stakes, took bearings from the tower corners, and drew a plan. Jacob watched her align the ruler with her father's brass tester case. "Elias measured twice, even when there was nothing left to cut," he said. The small recollection hurt more gently than praise. Before leaving, Jacob noticed the date chalked on her slate. He told her that 4-11-2 might refer to the collision inquiry. 4th witness, 11th question, 2nd answer. The official report was held in the parish reading room, but the committee had closed it years ago. Nora spent the afternoon making the north corner habitable. She reset 3 loose slates from inside, blocked the open windows with sacking, cleared the stove flue, and scrubbed pigeon filth from the instrument table. Work could not make the tower a home in one day, but it gave hunger and fear separate places in her mind. At sunset, a boy named Will Fenner appeared with a jug of milk. His mother had heard Nora could mend small mechanisms. Their kitchen alarm bell had stopped sounding, and Mrs. Fenner could pay 4 pence. Nora repaired it by lamplight and showed Will why the corroded spring had failed. The boy watched her hands with such attention that she gave him the broken spring and asked him to draw its shape. Her first 4 pence at Dunmere bought oats and another day's oil. The hidden circuit woke again at 9. This time the sender transmitted 4-11-2, North Battery, keep dry. Then, after Nora demanded an identity, came a single letter repeated 3 times. A. The line died. Outside, a lantern moved along the abandoned embankment. Nora shuttered her lamp and watched a man in a dark coat kneel where the northern cable crossed a drainage ditch. He fled when Jacob, summoned by Will, approached from the village road. In the mud they found a new brass terminal cap stamped CVR, company property manufactured less than 2 years before. The next morning Harcourt arrived in a polished carriage. He expressed surprise that Nora had made the tower almost civilized and offered £12 for the deed, enough to clear the rates and leave her with 3. She asked why the railway wanted a ruin it had valued at nothing 2 days earlier. He said a neighboring farmer had complained about drainage. His eyes moved once toward the lifted flagstone. Nora refused. Harcourt reminded her that the company could revive the criminal charge. She replied that a criminal court would require the original telegrams, the office clock records, and testimony under oath. For the first time his pleasant expression hardened. After he left, Nora found the northern wire cut cleanly inside the drainage ditch. Whoever had sent the messages could no longer reach her. She needed income before truth. Jacob introduced her to Mrs. Amity Fenner, who ran the village laundry, and had learned to distrust railway promises after her husband died laying track. Amity allowed Nora to place a handwritten notice in the laundry window. Bells, clocks, domestic call systems, and small electrical instruments repaired at Dunmere Tower. Within a week, Nora had 9 jobs. She charged modestly, recorded every farthing, and taught Will to clean contacts without bending them. The tower's lower room became a workshop. Jacob fitted a second-hand door. Amity brought a horsehair mattress. Nora paid the parish £1 on account, obtaining a signed receipt that established her possession in good faith. The jobs taught Nora more about Alderwick than questions would have done. A dairy bell failed because acid fumes from an improperly vented cheese room had eaten its contact. A Quarry widow's clock had stopped on the exact hour her pension visitor came each month, and Nora learned the pension was always 2 shillings short. She repaired the clock and accompanied the widow on the next collection, saying nothing while its clear strike made the clerk recount the coins. At the school, 6 call buttons installed by Caldervale had never worked together because the contractor joined copper to iron without protection. Nora corrected the joints and explained galvanic corrosion to 12 children using a lemon, a copper farthing, and a nail. Skill made conversation possible where innocence alone had not. People who would not ask whether she stole telegrams began asking how electricity traveled, and in answering she became a person again rather than a rumor. She kept strict boundaries with Will. He was 12, quick, and too eager to please. He swept filings, copied labels, and practiced the alphabet on a disconnected key. But Nora would not let him handle acid cells or climb the damaged stair. When he complained, she showed him the white scar on her wrist from a battery jar she had broken at 14. "Knowledge does not make danger feel insulted," she said. "It only tells you where danger is likely to wait." Will wrote the sentence at the back of his exercise book, misspelling likely twice before getting it right. Repairing the tower exposed its first true anomaly. The eastern and western exterior walls stood 19 feet apart, but the operating room measured only 16 feet within. A chimney occupied 18 inches, leaving another 18 unaccounted for. Nora used her father's plumb bob and found the west wall perfectly vertical, despite a bulge visible from outside. By tapping the plaster, she traced a narrow cavity extending from the battery cupboard to the floor below. The obvious entrance had been filled with hard Portland cement, newer than the surrounding lime mortar. Nora did not smash it. A concealed cable chamber might contain acid residue, unstable timber, or evidence destroyed by careless force. Instead, she sketched every dimension and searched the parish report. The reading room keeper, Mr. Cale, initially refused her. Amity arrived with 3 laundry customers who paid subscriptions to the room and requested the same volume. Faced with witnesses, he unlocked the cabinet. The report named Elias Whitlock as 4th witness. Question 11 asked when he had last tested the downline warning bell. His second answer read, "At 8 minutes before midnight, the circuit responded correctly." The printed report then claimed the collision occurred at 11:49, 9 minutes earlier. Nora saw the impossible sequence at once. Either her father's answer or the official collision time had been altered. In the margin, nearly erased, someone had penciled a tiny A beside the figures. She read the remaining testimony with the discipline she used on a faulty circuit. A porter reported hearing the goods wagons at midnight, though the official time was 11:49. A surgeon wrote that his carriage left Alderwick at 12 and reached the site within 7 minutes of the impact, a phrase later crossed out in blue pencil. Jacob's statement occupied only 4 lines. It said he could not recall seeing Elias, though Jacob now insisted he had described the red lamp for nearly half an hour. The signatures were genuine. The summaries above them were not necessarily so. Nora made 2 sets of copies and sealed one in Amity's flour tin, a hiding place ordinary enough to escape a document search. The second went beneath a loose hearth brick in the tower. She retained only her notes, refusing to let a single theft erase what 3 people had witnessed. The original evidence schedules were missing. Mr. Cale said the railway secretary had borrowed them in 1867 and never returned them. That secretary had been Edwin Harcourt's uncle and predecessor. Nora copied the relevant page exactly, with Amity and Jacob signing that her copy matched the bound report. Back at the tower, Will discovered that the warmth in the battery cupboard returned each afternoon, even though no fire burned. Nora removed a skirting board and found a thin copper strip behind it. Sunlight warmed an exterior slate plate, creating a slight current where 2 unlike metals met. Thomas Rook had built a primitive thermoelectric trickle source to keep a signaling cell from dying entirely. It could not send far, but it explained how a hidden automatic device might still produce taps when temperature changed. It did not explain the recent messages or the northern operator. Nora and Jacob opened the cavity through the lower lime mortar seam, leaving the newer cement untouched for evidence. Inside stood a bank of 4 dusty relays beneath a sloping copper shield. Each relay controlled a mechanical lock connected to a miniature pair of signal levers. A brass plate read, "Rook Whitlock Mutual Block, Trial Apparatus Number 2. Her father's name had not been added casually. The engraving was as old as the plate. Most of the apparatus survived because the cavity was dry and ventilated by 2 disguised weepholes. One relay had been removed recently. In its place, someone had connected a modern company wire to the secret circuit. On a shelf lay a waxed linen packet containing diagrams in Elias Whitlock's hand. The last page had been torn away, and without it Nora could not prove how the system had performed on the collision night. Still, the mechanism revealed the foundation of a safety device. Once a train entered a section, the opposing signal remained physically locked until the train completed the circuit at the far end. It could have prevented the Dunmere collision if it had been operating. Nora spent 2 full days before moving a component. She sketched the apparatus from the front, sides, and above, assigning every screw a number. Dust lay evenly on 3 relays, but not on the 4th mounting plate. The replacement wire had rubberized cloth insulation unavailable in 1865, and its binding screw carried the same triangular tool mark she had seen on equipment in Harcourt's private office. A small clockwork drum behind the signal levers held a strip of blackened paper. When current passed, a needle scratched a time trace into the soot. Most of the strip had decayed, but 3 pale arcs remained under the spindle where air had not reached. Elias and Rook had devised not only a lock, but a witness that could not be intimidated after an accident. One problem troubled her. The clockwork ran 8 minutes slow over 24 hours. If it had always done so, Harcourt might argue that every recorded time was unreliable. Nora dismantled the escapement and found a replacement pin cut from softer, modern steel. Beneath it, the original tempered pin lay trapped in grease. Someone had deliberately worsened the instrument during the recent intrusion. She placed both pins in separate envelopes, had Jacob mark their seals, and restored nothing until the county might observe it. Her restraint frustrated Will, who wanted to hear the bells. "A repair can become destruction when the condition itself is evidence," she told him. It was a lesson she had learned too late from the inquiry that repaired her father's story into a lie. The packet also held a letter from Rook to Elias. It referred to the North Battery copies and warned that Director Harcourt had ordered their trial results removed before a proposed patent meeting. The director named was Edwin's uncle, but the letter added that young Edwin, then a junior accounts clerk, had carried the locked dispatch case from Dunmere on the morning after the crash. Nora sat on the stone floor until her lamp sputtered. Her father had not merely been innocent. He had helped create a system the railway buried. Yet a private letter and an incomplete model would not overturn an inquiry. The company could call both forgeries discovered by an accused thief. She wrapped the papers in fresh oilcloth, recorded their location, and asked Jacob and Amity to witness the apparatus before she touched another screw. News traveled faster than evidence. By Sunday, Harcourt's agents were saying Nora had fabricated a machine to extort money. The parish demanded the remaining rates within 14 days after receiving a letter questioning her title. 2 repair customers withdrew their clocks. A brick struck the tower window after dark. Nora considered selling the model to a collector, but doing so would scatter the very proof she needed and turn her father's work into a curiosity. Instead, she demonstrated competence in public. Amity arranged the village schoolroom, where Nora explained the mutual block with 2 wooden levers, a length of wire, and bells borrowed from 3 cottages. She invited the skeptical schoolmaster to attempt to clear opposing signals. The lock prevented him every time. Jacob described the collision without embellishment. Nora did not accuse Harcourt. She stated only what the machine could do and what documents were absent. Several railway families paid a penny each to see the demonstration. The money cleared another pound of rates and bought seasoned boards for the tower roof. The demonstration nearly failed. Moisture in the borrowed wire leaked current through a cracked floorboard, allowing one bell to chatter without a lever moving. A man at the back laughed that the famous invention could not survive a schoolroom. Nora did not conceal the fault. She halted the test, asked everyone to remain where they stood, and traced the leakage with her tester until she found a wet knot beneath the headmaster's boot. She dried it, wrapped it in waxed cloth, and began again. The second trial worked. More important, the audience had watched her distinguish failure from fraud. Afterward, the laughing man brought her a broken quarry annunciator and paid the proper fee. He never apologized, and Nora did not require him to. Trust built from observable conduct was stronger than affection demanded on credit. Among the audience sat Agnes Rook, a gray-haired woman who introduced herself only after everyone else had left. She was Thomas Rook's younger sister, and the mysterious operator marked A. Her brother had sent her the key to a small battery hut north of Dunmere before his death. For 12 years she had kept his sealed instructions, afraid of the railway men who watched her cottage. When a newspaper reported Nora's accusation, Agnes connected the surviving northern line and transmitted Thomas's first test message. Harcourt's man had followed her on the second night and cut the wire. Agnes would not yet surrender the North Battery papers. Thomas had instructed her to release them only to someone who could restore trial apparatus number 2 and explain the sequence 4-11-2. Nora did both. Agnes then asked what Nora intended to do if the papers proved valuable. Nora answered that first she would clear her father, then make the safety system available on terms small railways could afford. Agnes studied her for a long moment. Thomas feared revenge would consume the invention, she said. He hoped use might redeem it. They agreed to retrieve the papers at dawn. That night smoke seeped through the tower floor. Before bed, Nora had written Agnes's statement in duplicate. Agnes described Thomas arriving at her cottage after the inquiry, with burned cuffs and a dispatch case whose lock had been forced. He believed the company would search every house connected to him, so he separated the proof. Technical logs at the North Battery, provenance letters at Dunmere, and official originals left within the railway's own retention system, where destruction required more than one dishonest hand. His plan depended on a future investigator recognizing contradictions across all 3 places. Nora admired its caution, but also saw the human cost. Thomas had protected the invention by leaving Elias publicly condemned. Agnes lowered her eyes and admitted that fear had made obedience easier than justice. Nora did not absolve her. She did promise that the final account would name both courage and delay truthfully. Nora woke Will, who had stayed late copying circuit symbols and fallen asleep beside the stove. Flames licked upward from the cable trench, fed by paraffin poured through the drainage ditch. Nora closed the iron trench cover to starve the fire, while Jacob rang the village bell. She could save the waxed packet or the wooden roof supports, not both. She handed the packet and her account book to Will through the window, then joined Jacob and Amity in carrying water. The lower stair burned through. Part of the roof collapsed, but the stone cavity and copper-shielded model survived. The fire moved in ways no accident would. Flames began at both ends of the trench, trapping smoke under the operating floor. Nora wrapped her mouth in wet wool and crawled to the battery cupboard to close a ventilation slide. A falling joist struck her shoulder, numbing her right arm. Jacob tried to enter, but she ordered him back. With one arm and a wooden crutch, he could not retreat quickly if the floor failed. Amity organized the bucket line, placing children at the well end and adults nearest the heat. Will, coughing in the yard, counted each person who emerged and refused to leave until Nora answered his call. By sunrise, their faces were black, the cistern was empty, and steam rose from the surviving walls. The village had saved a ruin the railway claimed nobody valued. Nora's shoulder worsened during the morning. The doctor found no break but bound her arm to her side, leaving her unable to manipulate a telegraph key or tester. Dependence frightened her more than pain. Amity washed soot from the letters. Jacob dictated an inventory of damage. Will drew the route by which the packet had passed through the crowd. Nora had to trust work done by other hands. It exposed a pride she had mistaken for self-reliance. Elias's legacy had failed partly because 2 men tried to guard it within a closed circle. If she repeated them, Harcourt needed only to silence one person again. Harcourt arrived with a constable before sunrise and accused Nora of burning company insulation to conceal stolen telegrams. The speed of his arrival betrayed knowledge, but not enough for arrest. The constable found a paraffin tin beside the ditch bearing Jacob's name. Jacob admitted it was his, taken from his workshop 2 days earlier. Harcourt demanded the tower be sealed as dangerous. Nora, her palms blistered and her hair singed, presented the deed, parish receipts, and 3 witnesses to the deliberate ignition. The constable allowed her 1 day to remove her belongings, while a magistrate considered the matter. Agnes disappeared before they could reach the battery hut. Her cottage door stood open, drawers emptied, and mud showed carriage wheels turning toward Caldervale. On the table lay a scrap of blotting paper, impressed with reversed figures. Nora shaded it with graphite. 17B, Railway Depository, East Yard. Agnes had left a destination, not a plea. The fire cost Nora her workshop and nearly all her tools. Worse, the torn last diagram page vanished from the packet during the confusion. Will confessed that a man had seized the packet while villagers passed buckets. The boy had held onto the letters and account book, but lost the loose drawings. Nora blamed herself for letting him near the danger. Will answered with unexpected firmness. "You taught me a signal means act, not hide." Nora chose to protect him from any further part in the search. She sent him home with Amity and traveled to Caldervale with Jacob. Depository 17B was a bonded document warehouse controlled by the railway but inspected by the county. Nora could not enter without authority. Mr. Pelham, the company solicitor, met her outside. He looked ill. Harcourt had ordered him to prepare an injunction voiding her deed on the claim that the tower had been transferred by clerical error. Nora showed him his own signature, the consideration clause exchanging the property for withheld wages, and her rates receipts. Voiding it would require him to swear that he had knowingly executed a false transfer. Pelham's courage did not arrive all at once. He admitted that Harcourt had ordered copies of telegrams made with Nora's initials after dismissing a night clerk named Samuel Brace. The originals remained in box 17B because company destruction schedules required 2 signatures, and Pelham had withheld his. Agnes Rook had been brought to the depository to identify her brother's papers, but she refused. Harcourt intended to move the box before the county inspection in 2 days. Pelham also revealed why Harcourt had chosen Nora. Her careful maintenance reports had repeatedly noted unexplained current on the North Circuit. A less skilled clerk would have ignored it as damp leakage. Nora had requested permission to trace the source. Harcourt then used the secret line to receive advanced tariff messages, sold selected information through an intermediary, and attributed the leakage to her instrument. Her competence created the danger to him, while her father's disgrace supplied an easy story about inherited dishonesty. The realization stripped away Nora's last private suspicion that some unnoticed mistake of hers had invited the accusation. She had not been punished for failing. She had been selected because she might succeed. Mr. Pelham placed his office keys on the wall ledge. His hands shook. Years earlier, as a junior solicitor, he had copied the settlement paid to the dead guard's family and noticed an unexplained condition forbidding them to discuss wagon ownership. He told himself it was ordinary legal caution. Each later compromise had seemed too small to justify risking his position. Harcourt built control from those small surrenders. Nora told Pelham that confession without action would merely make her his priest. If he wanted consideration from a court, he must sign a statement, preserve box 17B, and identify every person who carried orders. He signed. Nora asked Pelham to seek a magistrate's preservation order, not to save her but to save himself from becoming the next convenient culprit. She gave him 1 hour. Then she and Jacob went to the county clerk with copies of the inquiry report, the Rook letter, the deed, the fire witnesses' statements, and the brass terminal cap. Individually, none proved the entire fraud. Together, they established a credible risk that company records connected to a disputed fatal inquiry were being removed. By evening, a narrow order sealed box 17B pending inspection. Agnes was found in an office beside the depository, frightened but unharmed. Harcourt had no lawful means to detain her once the county officer arrived. Pelham surrendered his copies of Harcourt's instructions. Harcourt left by the rear yard before the seal was applied. The order almost came too late. 2 porters were loading records onto a covered wagon when the county clerk entered the yard. Nora recognized box 17B by a crescent-shaped repair on its lid, described in Thomas's letter. The manifest called its contents obsolete stationery destined for pulping. Jacob placed his body before the wagon while the clerk read the seal aloud. One porter backed away. The other tried to close the yard gates. Agnes called from an upstairs window and named Harcourt as the man who ordered the removal. With laborers gathering to watch, the depository superintendent chose obedience to the magistrate over loyalty to an absent director. The box returned to its iron rack under two new locks, one key held by the county and one by the railway. For the first time, the proof no longer depended on Nora keeping a hiding place secret. Nora returned to Dunmere expecting relief and found ruin. Rain entered through the fallen roof. The magistrate had posted a notice forbidding occupation until a mason certified the walls. Her repair income was gone, the rates remained, and the model could not safely stay. For the first time since the booking hall, she allowed herself to weep. Clearing Elias might take months, while hunger required an answer by morning. The answer came from the people whose opinion she had earned rather than purchased. Amity offered the laundry's unused drying room as a temporary workshop. The schoolmaster returned the pennies from the demonstration as a £5 loan subscribed by 17 households, each name and amount recorded. Jacob arranged for 2 masons to inspect the tower at reduced wages. Agnes placed Thomas's battery hut, a sound brick building, at Nora's disposal. One farmer remained loudly convinced that Nora was a fraud, but even he agreed not to obstruct the drainage repair. The village had not made her rich. It had made it possible for her to continue. At the county inspection, Box 17B yielded the missing structure of the truth. There were original telegrams bearing different time marks from Harcourt's copies, the office clock receipt, Thomas Rook's complete trial log, Elias Whitlock's sworn duplicate statement, accounts showing payments to suppress 2 witnesses, and a provisional patent application for the mutual block, lodged jointly by Rook and Whitlock, but withdrawn by the railway after the collision. Each document required authentication rather than wonder. The clerk compared watermarks with dated company paper. A retired station master identified the dispatch book binding and his own countersignature. The patent office confirmed the application number from its index, though the submitted model had vanished. A bank manager traced the witness payments to a private account used by Harcourt's uncle. Nora arranged the papers by source, date, and question answered. Where one sheet depended upon another, she tied them with blue thread. Where the chain remained incomplete, she used gray. By the second day, gray remained only around the identity of the wagons and the mechanism by which their movement had been concealed. Jacob supplied the first missing link. He remembered the wagons bearing removable chalk marks shaped like half-moons. In the accounts, Nora found stone deliveries billed to a fictitious contractor whose emblem was a crescent. Land records showed the stone had built a private warehouse owned by Harcourt's uncle. Samuel Brace supplied the second link from his old night notebook. Wagon numbers, axle counts, and an instruction to omit them from the public movement sheet. His notebook survived because his daughter had used its blank pages for sums and kept the filled ones as a cover. The ordinary domestic survival of evidence impressed Nora more than any locked chest could have done. The North Battery papers, which Agnes produced in the presence of the clerk, completed the technical chain. Trial apparatus number 1 had been installed north of Dunmere, number 2 controlled the south. On 14 March 1865, both correctly locked the opposing signals. Edwin Harcourt, then trying to conceal unauthorized wagons carrying stone for his uncle's private contract, ordered a clerk to bridge the relay so the wagons could enter an occupied section. Elias discovered the bridge and ran with his red lamp. Harcourt removed it after the crash and altered the recorded time so Elias's successful test appeared to occur afterward. Thomas copied the records but withheld them when threats were made against Agnes. The figures 4, 11, 2 directed a careful reader to the contradiction in the printed inquiry. The warm battery cupboard explained how Thomas's preserved test transmitter could awaken under sunlight. The modern terminal cap and missing relay showed that Harcourt had recently used the hidden line to intercept internal messages and create the leaks blamed on Nora. The torn diagram page, found among papers Harcourt attempted to send to his London solicitor, bore grease from trial apparatus number 2 and Will's fingerprint in soot along one edge, placing it at the fire. Nora spent 3 days checking every circuit entry against the physical model. She refused to claim more than the evidence supported. Some older directors had accepted the false inquiry without knowing its origin. Pelham had enabled Harcourt through cowardice, but eventually preserved the originals. Her precision gave the county engineer confidence to test the apparatus publicly rather than dismiss it as a grieving daughter's invention. The test took place at the restored North Battery hut. 2 temporary track circuits were laid across a meadow with weighted trolleys representing trains. Before magistrates, railway shareholders, reporters, and families of those injured at Dunmere, Nora rebuilt the missing relay from Rook's dimensions. She explained each contact, then invited the county engineer to operate the levers. When one trolley entered the section, the opposing lever locked. He tried again with the hidden bridge Harcourt had used. A separate warning bell, an improvement Elias added in pencil, sounded continuously and recorded the interference on a paper strip. Nora's injured shoulder prevented her from lifting the heavy lever. She asked Will to operate it under the engineer's supervision. Harcourt's counsel objected that a child made the trial theatrical. Nora answered that a safety system meant for exhausted night workers should not require exceptional strength or judgment. Will followed the written sequence, calling each action before he took it. When the interference bell sounded, its harsh, continuous note filled the meadow. Jacob closed his eyes. Agnes gripped Nora's good hand. The sound was not proof by itself, but joined to the logs, physical wear, and altered inquiry, it transformed an old accusation into a reproducible act. The engineer deliberately introduced 3 additional faults: a broken rail bond, a drained cell, and 2 wagons placed in the section before power was applied. The apparatus failed safely each time, keeping the signal at danger. Nora acknowledged that wet weather could reduce sensitivity and proposed insulated junction boxes and daily resistance tests. She did not present the device as perfect. Her candor persuaded the engineer that it was engineering rather than spectacle. He recommended a 6-month supervised trial on a working mineral branch, with all results open to inspection by workers as well as directors. Harcourt's flaw was his certainty that records mattered only when powerful men controlled them. Under questioning, he attacked Nora's competence and claimed no woman could distinguish old signals from new. Nora then identified the precise modern code abbreviation he had inserted into the supposedly 12-year-old trial messages. The abbreviation had been adopted by Caldervale only 3 years earlier, under a circular signed by Harcourt himself. Pelham produced the circular. Harcourt attempted to blame the dismissed night clerk, but Samuel Brace, located through wage records in Box 17B, testified that Harcourt had ordered the secret Southern line reconnected. The magistrates referred the forged accounts, arson evidence, unlawful detention, and interference with railway safety to the assizes. Harcourt resigned before the board could remove him, but resignation did not halt prosecution. His uncle was beyond judgment, yet the official record of the Dunmere collision was amended. Elias Whitlock's finding of intoxication was withdrawn, his warning run formally recognized, and compensation granted to his estate for wages and patent interest wrongfully denied. Nora's own accusation collapsed when the original telegrams and clock records were compared. Caldervale offered reinstatement and a private settlement if she surrendered all claim to the apparatus. She declined the private terms. In a public agreement witnessed by the county, she licensed the mutual block system to Caldervale at a fair rate, required that Rook and Whitlock be named as its originators, and reserved inexpensive licenses for small regional lines. A portion of every fee went into a relief fund for injured signal and track workers. Jacob was its first trustee. Winter did not vanish with the verdict, nor did Dunmere repair itself. Nora used the estate compensation to clear the rates, repay every village loan with interest, and stabilize the roof. She hired the masons rather than accepting endless favors. Through December and January, they rebuilt the stair, repointed the lime mortar, and fitted reclaimed slates. The burned floor was replaced with seasoned oak from a dismantled goods shed. Nora kept the scarred copper shield above the model, not as ornament but as proof that survival had required design and help. The compensation was less than newspapers imagined. Legal fees consumed £43. The roof and west wall required 68. Instruments, wire, and safe acid cabinets took another 31. Nora reserved a full year's rates before spending on comfort. She accepted orders from 3 railways, but refused delivery dates that would force untested work. When one director offered double payment for exclusive rights in a county, she showed him the public licensing clause and sent him away. Amity said Nora had become skilled at refusing rich men in better coats. Nora replied that practice had been abundant. Not every wound closed publicly. The dead guard's widow visited Dunmere and asked why Elias had not spoken louder before he died. Nora could not give her a satisfying answer. Elias had petitioned twice, then stopped when threats endangered Nora's apprenticeship. His silence protected his daughter while leaving another family without truth. Nora gave the widow copies of every record and offered part of the estate payment. The widow declined the money but joined the Relief Fund Committee, insisting that future families receive counsel independent of the railway. Their reconciliation remained imperfect, which made it honest. Agnes moved her brother's papers into a dry cabinet in the tower, where researchers could consult copies, while the originals remained with the county archive. Amity managed the workers' relief accounts for a proper wage. Jacob trained apprentices to inspect track circuits with one hand, as carefully as other men used two. Will attended lessons each morning and worked at the tower only in the afternoons, learning drawing, arithmetic, and the discipline of recording a test before celebrating its result. His first successful invention was a cheap alarm that warned laundries when boiler water fell too low. By the following autumn, Dunmere was no longer attached to a working railway, but its wires carried useful knowledge. The lower room became a repair shop serving farms and cottages. The operating floor became a small school where railway workers studied electrical safety without charge on Sundays. Orders for Nora's interference recording bell supported the building more reliably than the compensation could have done. She installed no grand furniture. A sound roof, a warm stove, 2 precise clocks, and shelves of labeled instruments were luxury enough. Above the workshop door, Nora mounted neither her cleared name nor the newspaper account of Harcourt's conviction for fraud and attempted destruction of evidence. She hung a simple painted board: Dunmere Signal and Electrical School, Rook Whitlock System. Beneath it she added the hours and fees, including a line stating that injured railway workers and their children paid nothing. On opening day, the booking hall porter who had watched her disgrace brought a damaged hand lamp. He apologized for remaining silent. Nora accepted the apology, but charged him the ordinary 6pence for repair. Mercy, she had learned, did not require accounts to become vague. The 6-month branch trial recorded 2 broken bonds, 1 unauthorized wagon movement, and a landslip that interrupted the circuit before a train reached it. In each case, the signal remained locked at danger. No director could promise that machinery would end human greed or carelessness, but the open paper record made concealment harder. 3 small railways adopted the system. Caldervale installed it last, compelled by insurers and workers who now knew what had been withheld. The change pleased Nora less as victory over the company than as evidence that usefulness could outlast resistance. One rainy evening, Nora received the first official message sent through a new mutual block installation 20 miles away. The operator reported that the locked lever had stopped a freight train from entering a section occupied by a work crew. No collision, inquiry, or widow's petition followed. The event existed only as a line in a safety register. Nora read the message twice, then placed it beside the corrected record of her father's warning run. Outside, the paired scars of the old rails had softened beneath grass. Inside, the restored key rested beneath Nora's fingers. She transmitted acknowledgments to the new station, each tap clean and deliberate. The tower had once been given to her as a place where disgrace might disappear unseen. Now its lamp marked the hill for every traveler in the valley, and its living wire carried not the secret of a dead man's ruin, but the ordinary news that strangers had reached home safely.